Welcome to the Hirewell Recruiting Insights podcast. I'm your host, James Hornick, partner at Hirewell. Today I'm joined by another partner at Hirewell who leads our managed recruiting practice, great friend and colleague, Jeff Smith.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
I think our last podcast did very well. Hoping to have you as a regular guest, maybe get you involved in some of the ones we have with outside guests, like I said. So
it fostered a relationship for us, like even deeper. So now we are going to see Rage Against the Machine with each other.
Yeah, so that was the big news since last time. So we had such a good time on the podcast, we decided to buy Rage tickets, and it was actually upset.
Relive our early 20s.
Yeah, I know. The best part was I'm sitting over here with with Bill and Ro and the HR people. I was real excited. I was mentioning I had Rage Against the Machine tickets, and Ryan was like, "Oh, that's cool," and someone else, "That's cool," and Gates is like, "Who's Rage Against the Machine?"
No, it's preposterous how many people in our office don't know who Rage Against the Machine is. It
blows my mind.
Yeah, it's.
But then you try to explain, well, rapcore, like rap and metal, but the problem is they were the only band that was any good. So then you're comparing them, no, not like that other band. Yeah. So. Anyways, that's going to be fun.
Yeah, it'll be great.
So what are we talking about here today? I promoted this one a little bit. I guess I wanted to lay it out there that, anytime you make a bad hire, and I guess I want to preface this by saying when we're talking about making a bad hire, we're not really talking as much today about the interview process and just getting it wrong when you're picking people. The purpose of today's podcast is really a lot of times when people get a hire wrong, it's because their initial thought of what they thought they needed to hire for in the first place was completely flawed.
Indeed.
So it's really before, you're not even interviewing people yet, you're not even evaluating people, you're not trying to pick the best candidates, you're just trying to figure out what it is you actually need in your organization. And I guess on top of that, dovetailing, it's even worse when it's done at a C-level. And it happens a lot.
Yeah.
So when
that's what we're focused on today, right?
So today the topic of today's podcast is when, what you need to do internally to evaluate if you need to hire someone at C-level, what it is you need to do to make sure you're making the right type of hire to begin with. And I think I've said before that getting a hire wrong at any level, at most levels it just kind of sucks. Everyone's been in that situation. But when you make the wrong hire at an executive level, at the C-level, it's absolutely killer. It sets your organization back 6 months, a year, maybe longer with whatever you're trying to accomplish. And that's why we want to talk about this one. So.
Yeah, and big companies are insulated a little bit more from maybe some of those mistakes, but it's still relatively catastrophic if you're talking about a company. A lot of the companies that we work with are either growing or have some VC backing, etc. That spend and that subsequent miss can be life-ending.
Yeah, and I guess to qualify this further, like Jeff said, a lot of our clients and a lot of the people we talk to on a daily basis, a lot of our audience, I guess, is places that are in that small to medium size phase that are growing, and this is the first time potentially they're making a hire like this. And I was talking about this on LinkedIn the other day, and someone mentioned that why don't they just promote from within? Or why they? But the thing is that a lot of the organizations.
Which I thought was a great question.
It was a great question. Yeah. The answer is because this is the first time this organization's ever needed a CFO or a CTO. Like on the tech side, a lot of small startups, they get going because they have got one or two brilliant developers, maybe architects, but people who have zero leadership experience or zero management experience. They're a great builder, they're still integral to the team, but all of a sudden there's a lot of companies out there that, they get around to funding, they need to scale, they need to double in size, and you actually need people who have management experience or some other type of experience. And that's on the tech side, but even in other areas, they might be building out a marketing function. You might not have anybody, there might not be anybody internally who has the type of experience you need. And it's not a function of, growing people and fostering your talent. It's when fast scaling and fast growth happens, there's always some level where you need to go outside.
Yeah, and that gentleman who asked that question, I think it was the most commented or at least discussed comment in that strand. To kind of piggyback on your point, those companies only 20, 30 people maybe max, and then they get that is a group of entry-level talent.
Yeah.
2 or 3 co-founders.
Yeah.
So yes, in theory, it's a great idea to want to put an individual contributor, if we're going to talk about a CTO, software engineer, in a position that is of greater value to the company. But when you make that decision, and if you've done what we're going to talk about, vetting this out, I think it's pretty. You'll quickly realize that somebody like that it's ill-afforded, and that person's probably not ready for the type of scale that we're looking for.
Exactly.
Yep.
So first thing, right off the top, first question: why are you doing this? Why are you hiring a CTO? Falls into two categories usually. Are you adding somebody new? Is it a brand new position, or are you replacing somebody?
Yep.
So first off, like adding people, what do you need to be asking yourself? What are some of the core things?
Across the board, if we're talking CXO, right? Like, what gaps are we filling?
Mm-hmm.
Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? What are the objectives of the organization? Is it revenue generating? Is it gross profit? Is
Mm-hmm.
it size and scale? Is it? It can be a number of different reasons, and all of those things play into the type of individual that you want to select.
Yeah.
Right? If it's a pure, revenue generating kind of operation, you want to go after somebody who has really strong sales, both operational and tactically, that sort of background, regardless of kind of what level or what vertical you're hiring into, be it technical, revenue, human resources, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
You want them to have a business focused mind that's generated to revenue growth.
Yeah.
And et cetera, et cetera. So
Mm-hmm.
every single time you think about one of these competencies, you want that to be a tie that binds within any of those individuals that you're putting into that layer.
Yeah. I think that that adding somebody new is the harder one. The replacing one, and typically when we see people who have to replace somebody, it's typically because they realize they already screwed up at some point in the past. And it's not because that individual wasn't good, it's just that they didn't hire, they did this process that we're talking about wrong the first time.
Yeah, or maybe it was somebody that was put into this role from a 30-person org, and now it's a 150-person org, and they weren't set up to do it. And they've put some of the building blocks in place that work. I mean, I would say that anybody who makes it 2, 3, 4 years down the road and the company still survives has done something right.
Mm-hmm.
So the replacement becomes more about really tell me about the things that you've done to identify what we do really well and what we do really, really terribly.
I think that another thing too is in replacement hire situations, what's been communicated. One from have you actually changed the job description? Is there something fundamentally? If you're going by what you did last time, do you need to reevaluate what the job is, which we'll talk about more too. But two, what's been communicated to the person you're replacing? Is this a situation where there's kind of like you mentioned, the organization's grown dramatically. This person's no longer really set up to succeed. There's still a place for them there, though, but in a different capacity, or maybe the same capacity as there's just another level or another kind of role being brought in, which this new one is. Or is it a situation where there's a separation? How are you dealing with that? How are you communicating with that?
Yeah. All of this stuff is relevant, and the reason we're talking about that is because I think that a lot of companies, their heart's in the right place more often than not. They're not thinking about just the human feelings of what it feels like to have that layer added,
mm-hmm.
but also conversely, how does that feel from the entire from everybody down the silo, right? And what does that mean for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And having a plan and having talked about that plan as a senior leadership team in an addition or a replacing scenario is critical to making sure that everybody that is productive and adding value feels protected and comfortable and understanding of kind of what the move forward strategy is.
Yeah.
So not only is it a competency thing, but it's an ability to clearly articulate to the organization
mm-hmm.
what the objectives are moving forward and how each one of those players is going to have an impact on it.
And I think that's the thing. It's a lot of it is in the communication because I think everyone can think about just a poorly run organization, right? That they brought in somebody new because it was nepotism, it was their buddy, you know what I mean? And everyone in the organization is like, oh, this guy sucks, this company sucks, why am I here? But at the same time though, if you have a good reason for bringing someone in that actually makes sense, but that's not being communicated down, your employees might have that perception that there's some sort of underhanded nonsense going on. And even so, kind of in that, I guess maybe I'm kind of repeating what you said, but that's why it's so important that it's not just, hey, other executives, let's think about this, but it's also we need to include the whole organization to make sure there's some awareness of what's happening.
I don't think we really talked about this in prepping, but it's really important. I think, in a referral situation, clearly communicating why that individual is coming in, and that it isn't just about it being like, hey, my buddy from college, or this guy I worked with or gal I worked with 10 years ago. It's like, no, these are the skills and objectives that
this was made based on merit, not based on
right.
So even if it was based on merit, you have to make sure that's articulated. Like, here's why this person's brought in, and have actual deliverables or reasons why this person's there. So to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to this comment that we talked about. Whoever that commenter was, we'll have to look it back up. Kudos to you, because it started a great conversation. It just goes back to being able to create the narrative that fosters that sense of inclusion and trust in a workforce that is going to wonder why didn't I get that shot? Why didn't I get why wasn't I considered to be, CXO? I'm director of this, and being able to say, well, here's the gaps. Here's what this person brings to the table, and here's how we can get you to the next level of your career.
Okay.
Total aside, but yeah, that was good.
All right, next part of this. Prioritizing what it is you need, and this sounds funny because these are all going to be like, oh, we need all of this, which is the challenge, which is what everyone thinks. People management, hands-on ability, strategic vision. These are three completely different things. And I would say that everyone we ever talk to who's making a senior level hire or any hire, they're like, oh, we want all three of those things. We want a people manager who's hands-on, that has a great strategic vision. I'm like,
doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's running Tesla, but aside from that, what else? And that's the joke.
I bet you if you interviewed him though,
he doesn't.
He would 100% cop to the fact that he is not totally.
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's very, and I think that's the reason why when you look at startups, there's very few, the ones that really blow up, there's very few where the original founder, the original CEO continues to take them on to the large organization. You know what I mean? So there's a few very famous ones you can think of, Zuckerberg's still running Facebook, or is he? Yeah. Anyways, but there's a lot of, more often than not, at some point there's usually leadership change, because someone whose strength is kind of working at that lower level because they're kind of hands-on isn't necessarily stronger when things they're no longer in their wheelhouse. But that's why you need to figure out where you are in your company's growth, and do you still need someone who's still very hands-on with either the technology or the tactical stuff, or is it strictly a strategy role? Is it someone who's going to think about how to take you forward, or is it truly a people manager? And those, like I said, are three different things that no one's great at all three of them. At least if you think you're going to find someone who's great at all three, you're probably going to be vetting on the wrong things only to find out that they really weren't, which is what happens more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, if your issue is, for example, penetrating new markets with or product development, very theoretical and more long-term strategic goals, you want to go after somebody who has developed and done R&D and thought about those sorts of things strategically. If your goal is to grow by X number of headcount, and you have a viable product, but you need X amount of people in engineering to do so, that's a more tactical, transactional, in the weeds role. You want somebody who has scaled that. Yeah. This isn't rocket science. It's really just taking a step back, taking an inventory of what the need actually is, and then hiring to that specific strength.
Yeah.
I know we just keep saying it, but it's, maybe it's just easy for us.
If it was common sense, then we wouldn't be. Right. Anyway. All right. So I would say the next thing is objectives and outcomes. Yeah. What is it exactly? How are you measuring the success of this person? And that's something that there's a lot of, if your answer is, we'll know it when we see it, that's not a good answer, And I think a lot of organizations, they go in thinking that they might have an expectation of what they want to see, but that isn't voiced or that isn't communicated in the interview process. And then I've seen plenty of times where someone starts and maybe they think they're doing a great job, only to find out that the expectations of the other senior management or ownership is completely out of whack with what they had in mind. And then they, 3 months into it, they realize this isn't working out. So I think that you have to have very kind of measurable and clearly articulated. One, you have to sort that out yourself. You have to actually know, it's part of your process of where you're hiring somebody. As an organization. As an organization, what we want to see from this person, what those kind of outcomes and deliverables are, and then also make sure those are kind of clearly articulated in the interview process, and that narrative is consistent
all the way down the funnel. 'Cause
Yeah.
if you're having a C-level executive interviewing, more than likely you're going to have the rest of the leadership team interviewing, and I would hope a handful of other people.
Yeah.
Regardless if it's below or above the rung of where they're going to come in at. And to our point earlier, if you're not talking about this stuff all the way down the funnel and the narrative is all disjointed.
And yeah, I wouldn't see even in this situation too, like above that, like your board, your investors, what are their expectations? Because if they're not completely, if they had different expectations from a strategy or company growth standpoint, then maybe what your CEO is thinking from these types of things, and that's also not kind of articulated. It's like I said, this is one of the areas where I see the most often where senior management ends up bailing out, whoever gets hired into this role realizes 3 to 6 months in, like, this was a mistake, this was a disaster. And it's really because like the lack of articulation during the interview process and what the actual outcome was supposed to be.
Sure. Yep.
All right, moving on. What else we got? Challenges this person would solve. Trying to understand where this person would actually come from. I've seen this. I mean, I think this is kind of a wheelhouse topic for recruiters, like us, because this is what most of our day is really kind of obsessed with. Because all the retained recruiting we do always comes down to, okay, what challenges do you actually need solved? Who's done this in the past, based upon who's had similar kind of work experiences, whatnot. And I think that I don't know if this is the same as the big versus small challenge I've seen with some companies where they screw it up, but I've seen another mistake I see a lot of organizations making with senior management is it's their first time. They don't want to miss on a hire, so they want to, quote unquote, play it safe and go with a big company hire, only to find out that big company person doesn't have as much in the weeds experience. Because let's say this is a smaller to medium-sized company that's trying to scale. Let's say it's an e-commerce company that we're going to try to poach from a larger e-commerce company, only to find out that larger organization that person in that organization has not solved the challenges that we're trying to solve at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, maybe that individual, to all you big companiers out there, like, it's not your fault. It's a product of your day-to-day team insulation. When you go from a bigger, more well-established team with multiple levers to pull and multiple resources at your disposal, it's very hard to transition quickly to something that is bare bones and, fly by the skin of your teeth. And any human would have trouble adjusting to that. And I think everybody wants to think that they can do that. But in reality, if you haven't set the roadmap, again, if we're talking about like what you do prior, even if it's unconsciously, you're set up for failure.
And I think I want to make this clear too, because I'm never saying that you shouldn't, if you're a small company, you shouldn't hire a big company person. If you're a big company, you should hire a small company person. But it should be on the forefront of your mind that understanding if the people from a very different environment have solved problems or can demonstrate their ability to do so. That's something you want to make sure you're vetting, because it's just one point you need to make sure you're covering. But I think the thing is that I guess when you're kind of when I was kind of saying big versus small too, sometimes smaller company people, they're just more aware of larger, well-known brands as consumers, right? So if they're going to be aware of people who might come from organizations they've heard of, they're probably not aware of other organizations if they're outside of their category that might actually be a great fit. So, they might not be, it's more of an awareness thing where they need to do more research on what organizations are out there that we should be kind of looking into that might have good people. That way they're not, not discriminating against, but they're not kind of, their lack of awareness about the people they should be going after based upon the organization they come from isn't holding those candidates back compared to larger candidates from organizations they're more familiar with. Yeah,
it's a very good point. And again, it just goes back to like clear and concise objection kind of report, or objective reporting. Like, large companies have very like micro climates, and they have little micro initiatives where like a group of the misfit toys go off and do something incredible, and we want to know about that. And the only way that you can know about that is to allow that individual in. And if we're really getting into like the recruiting side of it a little bit, a company that's able to clearly articulate like the 5 to 7 main objectives for this executive. And maybe they have us as a retainer or another firm as a retainer or their internal recruiters, being able to talk about that openly, relay that message appropriately, have it conveyed and corroborated across the interview process, allows the recruiter, when they're pitching it, to talk about it openly, and it opens that funnel for the candidate to be like, wait, this exact experience is what I'm going to correlate with this particular need at real time, and then we're able to convey that, or the recruiter's able to convey that in a way that says, boom, like the CEO can look at that resume and say, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah,
feel like I found a diamond in the rough, even though that term is garbage. You found the diamond in the rough because you were asked the right question and you gave the right information.
True. I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on. We still have a lot to cover here. What?
See, we didn't need to.
No, we have like some high level things we want to go into.
I know we're like on dot 3, and we've got 10 days.
We're gonna be here all day.
All right, that's fine.
All right, so impacting growth. I guess this was the thing. Actually, the one I wanted to really get into was like hiring people who because this also gets into people who are potentially internally and promoting hire. People who have been there and done that, who've solved the exact problem you're looking for, versus the up-and-comer, someone who hasn't done it yet, but you think is a high potential kind of rising star type thing. And there's different schools of thought out there. I mean, some companies, I've seen it kind of work both ways. Some companies feel like if we hire someone who has the exact experience to solve the exact problem, that's great. I mean, we were kind of just talking about that a minute ago. Other organizations, they want to hire someone they can tell is just a star that knows what they're doing and give them that kind of growth opportunity. And there's there's pluses, upsides and downsides on both. I don't know if you had any initial thoughts on this one. The one I would say is, because I'm always a fan of because this also ties in employee growth, right? If you're open to up and comers, is there anybody at your organization that can actually be doing this, that deserves kind of that jump?
Yeah.
And that's always kind of the first thing you should be looking at, because I think there is a phenomenon with. I was actually trying to Google this to find it, because I've seen it, and I think it's a thing that has a name with some sciencey thing where, you bring someone into an organization, maybe right out of school as a junior employee, and they've been with you for 10 years. And you still, on some level, kind of think of them as like that junior person, you know what I mean? Versus someone who has the exact same level of experience that's been outside the organization, that comes in and like, oh, so-and-so's that's also why I think people move jobs, not to get on a job hopping thing, but people move jobs because anytime you get a fresh start, your baggage from 10 years ago or 5 years ago doesn't kind of come with you. I do wonder if, I think if you're open to looking at up and comers, you have to make sure you're giving people at your own organization like an honest look that you do even need to look on the outside.
Yeah, agreed.
For this type of thing.
I think, again, it depends on what level your organization is at right now. What stage are you in? A larger, more established, fiscally kind of stable company can maybe take a swing depending on what their kind of, what their litany of must-haves looks like. And maybe institutional knowledge is the job description. That happens a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
We both of us have gone through many searches where we get to the 6th, 7th sub, and it's like, this person was great, but they don't have this, and you basically say, well, what you're looking for is somebody that works at your company.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, even think about it, kind of think about things here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's when we've brought in people from the outside in fairly high positions, it's only been in situations where we just didn't have any, but it's a brand new function for us. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Versus everyone else we have here at, kind of partner level, where people who had been with us that took on more responsibility.
I know, I'm the jerk that came in and got to partner out from the outside.
But I mean, you were with us for 4 years, 5 years still,
Almost 5,
so. Yeah, but at the same time too, there's certain practice areas we have here we just didn't have anybody with that experience. And I think you kind of relate it back to that. So,
I think that I think it's great that this kind of turned into how what it should look like to try and get those avenues to promotion from within. Even if it isn't at the executive level, companies who grow and establish those paths and those talent development pools and those pipelines internally and are able to articulate that stuff really, really well. They don't have these issues. They don't even have to ask this question. In
true.
some respect. So if you're already at the point where you're asking the question, the likelihood is probably that you haven't identified somebody internally that you feel like you can do it.
Yeah.
But if during that conversation you realize, holy crap, like institutional knowledge is actually really, really important.
Yeah.
I would almost pivot the other way and say, take a swing on somebody.
Yeah, no, I think that I think about the guy who was commenting on the LinkedIn thing the other day, because he has a good point. Like if you're,
he's like a star now.
yeah, I
This
know.
is great.
I've had some examples. I don't want to name company names, but there was one organization we work with. They were like in the financial industry that was building their first e-commerce site, right? Their first, so it was brand new for them. So they didn't have a technology division that had done this before, so they wanted to bring in someone on the outside, which totally makes sense.
Yep.
But this is kind of relating back to the been there, done that versus the up and comer. So, but they were so obsessed with people thinking they needed people with their industry knowledge that they brought there. That was their first hire for this position. And it was an absolute train wreck because they brought an individual who came from their industry, an industry that isn't very progressive.
Right.
You know, thinking that industry knowledge is going to be important. And then instead they end up getting a guy who came from Amazon but had not been at this level of position before, but knew the e-commerce technology game, knocked it out of the park, and they're crushing it right now.
Right.
So it's interesting that.
Yeah, no offense to financial systems, but they're bulky and plotting and
And I think it's also a case of like, are you trying to, is this something, if it's a brand new function you're building versus just scale, you know what I mean? So
brought us back to objectives.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, these are all great examples of like the types of things that you need to talk about before you put that rec out. And you say, well, this is what we want. Even if it's internally, externally, like what are you solving?
Yeah.
Is this an enterprise-wide like initiative where we're going after XYZ, or to your point, is this an isolated but very important product or new offering that we're trying to develop that's going to be totally greenfield? I mean, those are two completely different profiles.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies get caught up thinking that both of those can meld into the same person, and it's just not the right. Yeah, it's just not the right approach.
Okay.
Cool.
Switch gears a little bit here, because this is an interesting too. Team-wise, are they building a new team or are they inheriting an existing team? Because this was where it gets dicey.
Yeah.
You know. And from a couple of ways, if they're building a new team, I think that's the easier scenario. If it's a new function, new product line, something brand new about it, great. They can bring in their people. They can do their own vetting. It's going to work out perfectly. But what do you do when you've determined, you already have a team around this, but for whatever reason you need a different type of leadership, and you don't have anyone internally that's kind of ready for that or senior enough to take it on? How you vet that out in terms of how is this person going to be I think it takes a certain type of leader to step into a new organization knowing that they're the outsider.
Yeah.
And finding a way, because even though they're in charge, they still have to find a way to fit in and mix in, and making sure people realize that, he or she's not going to be the person who's just going to dump everyone for their cronies at some point in time, which is what everyone's afraid of, right? As soon as some leader comes in from the outside, everyone thinks, I might be out of here. They start putting their resumes together. They start calling people like us saying, I don't know what's going to happen.
And it's well warranted,
which happens all the time. Yeah, and it does happen. So, but that's the thing is, are you, and I guess, are you bringing this person in, vetting out to make sure they're not the kind of person who's going to want to clean house? Is there a reason why you want to clean house, right? Is this a bigger issue, which is,
again,
I don't know
maybe an objective.
Yeah.
It could be.
So, yeah, I don't even know if I want to go there in this podcast, but that's a different kind of thing entirely. But let's make the assumption that, like, you actually like the team. You like what everyone's doing. And how do you make sure that, one, you're bringing in the right person? Because it really just comes down to communication skills, you know what I mean? And vetting, making sure the person you're bringing in from the outside is the kind of person who plays well with others and plays well with new people, and making sure that transition goes well. Because even if you like what that person had to say during the interview on paper, if they mess this up or they're not the right kind of person for this, it can be an absolute catastrophe.
Yeah. I mean, you can break it down into both of the first two things that we were talking about. I mean, if you're adding, you have to, the first thing you want to do internally is make sure that the team understands what the objective is, that they clearly understand that their jobs are safe, that their work is very much appreciated, all XYZ, all of the above, and be very specific about that.
Yeah.
And then as you vet, you have to vet to find kind of the leader servants. You have to ask about communication style. You have to make sure that, that their previous, 1 to 2 stops as they've managed people isn't, a situation where they have, moved people around or shuffled people in and out, that they have demonstrated ability to inherit teams and foster like a lot of
got a backdoor reference. And that's gonna be a controversial thing when it comes to job seekers, but I think at the leadership level, it's like, we have to get references from real people. You know what I mean? Because I think that I was saying the other day, people need to backdoor reference companies 100%.
I've been a big proponent for years at the executive level. Like, enough of these peer references.
Yeah.
Give me an employee. Give me an employee reference.
Yeah. If you're a leader, give me 5 people from your teams you managed in the past.
1 to 2 rungs down.
Yeah. And see what they have to say.
Yeah.
But I think that. Because I think the reference game is, you're correct in going off on a different tangent here, that's the problem with the reference game is, and I think in my entire career in recruiting, asking for references from thousands of candidates, I think I had 1 who gave me a bad reference.
I also have 1.
Yeah. Like
I know for certain I have 1.
Anybody who can't give you a good reference, like it's almost a joke to even ask for references. You know what I mean? But I think, it's a chicken or the egg. Completely different topic entirely. But I think when you're talking about stuff at the management level like this, that's absolutely correct. Like, give me a lot of references that are several rungs below you, and just find out what everyone else has to say. Now,
to get to the second part, replacing. If you're replacing somebody, the first thing you do is, especially if this is you have to break it down in 2 parts. If this is a public separation, like you maybe for whatever reason the two, the employee and the organization have amicably agreed that it's like not the right fit.
Yeah,
it happens. You want to take an inventory immediately of that person's part of the organization and just say like, hey, what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because then that way you have actual data that suggests like, this is like how these people and this group is used to working. This is what they're comfortable with. And then you assess like kind of what their strengths and weaknesses are, and you kind of generate a formula as based on like the type of people manager that you want to bring in, right?
Yeah.
If it's not so public, or if this is unfortunately something where you don't want the employee to know, I still think it's critical to get a pulse of like kind of what the vibes are. I would assume that if it isn't going to be an amicable split, that like the vibes that go down the ladder might not be as positive. But that's when you get actual, again, real data.
Yeah.
And you can talk to your kind of incoming candidates in a way that says like, hey, we've got some high performers down the chain and we feel like they're being a bit suffocated. And how are you going to pull that out? How are you going to foster that stuff?
Well, the thing is, I want to disagree with that because, I mean, you can't rule out, I'm not disagreeing with it, but adding the other side of it, there are plenty of times where they're replacing existing leaders because they're awful.
Yeah,
No,
100%.
I mean, like a lot of times, like there's more than situations I can count where we've heard of organizations where the C level or the VP level person running part of the organization is just not a nice person.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think that in those kind of situations, but that's why you have to have your finger on the pulse, because this is kind of getting off a separate topic, but you don't want to be losing employees due to poor management, right? And having your pulse on what employees are thinking is going to better enable you to know when these types of changes need to happen. But also you need to find out how to strategically communicate with your employees that you've heard them, and that if there's a problem with someone in management because they're just not a kind person, as we like to say, that's being kind of resolved.
Yeah, I think the last thing, my star on the top of like maybe this subject is, and to tie it all together, is one of the most important questions I think that any executive team or board or interview panel can ask of an incoming executive candidate is really like, what is your strategy for succession planning?
Yeah.
It gets back to that comment. It's inevitably you want to grow to the size of an organization where you don't have to go and do this externally. And if you're bringing in an executive who truly understands what it means to like prop up the rest of his organization, you will inherently you'll reap the benefits of somebody who is going to have his or her successor ready to go, or multiple successors.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the ideal scenario, right?
Absolutely. I'm looking to see if we have, I think we inadvertently covered almost everything, but there's few more things I still want to get into here. So we did talk about this to death without even realizing it, but like current employees fit the role. Is there anybody you can bring in on the inside? And I think that you just kind of nailed it there. Your ultimate goal is, as your organization grows, is to never need to bring anybody in from the outside. Or if you do bring people from the outside, it's at the lower levels, and you're always kind of fostering talents. That's kind of a key thing. Getting down to the tactical things, one of the more tactical things in terms of starting this interview process up, though, if you have identified that it's an easy to hire need to make from the outside, who's going to be involved in the process? Mm-hmm. And I, from two angles, this is important. One, you obviously need to know like who should have a say in this and who has feelings about this and what impacts does it involve. But two, it's so critical at this level that everyone is on the same page, mm-hmm. because this is an interviewing and process and candidate experience thing for any level, but at the senior management and executive level, it's even more embarrassing when it's not done correctly. When you have people in the interview process giving different reasons for the position being open, different objectives that they're looking for, like everything has to be completely streamlined, mm-hmm. In terms of what that messaging is for why this is even happening and why you're bringing somebody in from the outside.
We didn't talk about this, and I'm curious to know your thought. I think mm-hmm. I know the answer, but I might be wrong. Are you in favor, if done well, to have interviewers from like the actual team, maybe a rung or two down, interview this individual as maybe a panel or something? I
think you definitely have to. Anytime you're talking about somebody from the outside and they're inheriting a team, having that team involved in the interview process, it'd be terrible unless your objective is to clean house and get rid of the team, which is, again, not our audience and who we're even talking to about this. But if there'd be no worse message sending out to the organization, causing a lot of that issues like, hey, this was nepotism and whatnot, mm-hmm. if you're cutting the teams out of the interview process.
I'd be interested if anybody who's listening has had any specific experience with this. I think both James and I would like to know, when this is done well, what does it look like? Mm-hmm. I am. And then to your point, is it the board? Is it every single executive? Is mm-hmm. it multiple rounds? There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. And I think we have one left here. M&A activities. That's mm-hmm. the other thing.
Yeah.
Riff on that?
I have. I'm the one that brought it up. Again, this happens across the board. We try and bucket this stuff into small, large, medium organizations, but it can happen at any level.
Yeah.
And as companies, this has become a much more normal transaction in mm-hmm. the way that companies grow. Companies now are growing by acquisition at a rate that's whatever time. Should have done some research.
More often than not, we've had a ton of clients come to us for executive retained searches, and it's because their objective is to be sold in 5 years.
Yes.
So they want someone who can help them get to that level. Whether it's building something new technology-wise, whether it's marketing better, whether they have the financial background, mm-hmm. but that's always in the background for these types of hires. But the question is how well are you articulating that?
Maybe a decade ago that was a bit taboo.
Yeah.
It's a scary. But I think a lot of these folks in this candidate pool, mm-hmm. if they haven't physically gone through it, they know somebody or have been very close to somebody who has gone through some sort of merger or acquisition. So it's an easier thing to talk about. And I think companies who are really talking, if that clearly is an objective of the company, mm-hmm. it should be something that should be talked about and gleaned as a positive.
Yeah.
Because for that executive to go through that is not only, it's a notch on your cap if you can get to the point where you've either acquired or are acquired, hypothetically, right? But it in a lot of cases can be attractive for the right candidate.
Yeah.
Because they've done it and they want to do it again. And that's what kind of grinds their gears.
I think how long have we been going here? This has been fun. I think this is my longest podcast on record, 40 minutes, crushing it.
Great.
I don't see. Of course, when the podcast version, they're going to take out all of our ums and ands, so we'll be on 20 probably. So
and I bet everybody's gonna say, well, what did you guys just talk about?
Yeah, I don't know. What are we doing? So, anyways, anything else you wanted to discuss? Anything else? I think we talked it to death.
No, just have a plan. Again, not rocket science, but if you sit back, sit with your board, sit with your executive team, get with the key players, figure out what makes sense, ask the right questions, get your 5. It doesn't have to be a laundry list. It doesn't have to be 20 key objectives. It's 5 objectives.
Yeah.
think about it near term, the next 12 to 24 months. Because 24 months from now, your objectives are going to be totally different.
And we got
Fiend.
and then we have 3 months until the Rage Against the Machine concert, which is really the most important takeaway of the day.
Which we need to get floors for. Cause,
our seats are too far back.
Throw the old man strength around a little bit.
Yeah, I know. Good luck. Yeah, if anyone else is going to Rage in Chicago, let us know. We'll meet you there. Anyways, I think that's all we got for today. See if I can stumble through the outro here. Thanks again for listening to Hirewell's Recruiting Insights podcast. If you like what you heard and want more insights from our recruiting experts like Jeff Smith, visit hirewell.com/recruiting-insights. And remember to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. See you guys soon.
See ya.